Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving right into a massive turning point in human history, industrialization and daily life, specifically looking at the Great Migration. Now, to kick things off, we're starting our journey with a piece of ancient wisdom. Plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. That's Proverbs 15:22. You might be wondering, why look at a scripture from Proverbs when we're about to dive into the history of factories, smog, and smokestacks? Well, because when the world changes rapidly, when the very fabric of society is turned completely upside down by new tech and wild new ways of living, we desperately need deep, grounded wisdom to navigate all that chaos. That word counsel really means seeking out careful, deliberate guidance before taking a huge leap. And as we look at the monumental choices people made back then, we've got to ask ourselves how they planned for the future and what inevitably happens when unchecked technological progress just completely outpaces moral counsel. I want you to take a second and really put yourself in this situation. Imagine making the life-altering decision to just abandon the only life your family has ever known. Before the 19th century, the vast majority of human beings lived their entire lives intimately connected to the soil. For generations, your ancestors lived on the exact same patch of land. They knew the dirt, they could literally read the changing weather in the clouds, and the rhythm of their existence was completely driven by the seasons. But then, the machines woke up. Massive factories were built, completely redefining the horizon. And you decide to pack up whatever you can carry, leaving behind the quiet, predictable rhythm of the countryside for the loud, smog-filled, crowded unknown of the city. This wasn't just a simple move across town. This was a fundamental, terrifying leap into the absolute unknown. And yet, this was the reality for millions of people. Which brings us to a massive historical question, right? Why? What on earth could convince millions upon millions of people to suddenly pack up, leave the open air, and abandon the only way of life they had ever understood? People don't just uproot their entire lives, their families, and their communities for absolutely no reason. There had to be a gravitational pull so incredibly strong that it drew them away from the safety of the farms. So what were those economic forces? What was the promise being made in the cities that made the terrifying risks of the unknown seem entirely worth it? Well, the answer to that gravitational pull is rural to urban migration. Basically, the massive population shift from the countryside to cities in search of economic opportunities. As industrialization took hold, huge new industries began popping up in centralized locations. We're talking sprawling textile mills in places like England and New England, and massive coal-powered plants that were transforming raw materials into goods faster than anyone had ever seen. And let me tell you, these factories were hungry. They were absolutely desperate for human labor to operate the deafening looms, shovel the coal, and keep those relentless production lines moving. To get that labor, factory owners offered the one thing that the unpredictable, weather-dependent life of farming rarely could: steady, guaranteed wages. If you put in the hours, you got paid. That lure of a reliable, predictable income in a world used to surviving on unpredictable harvests, it was simply irresistible. Now, the promise of those steady wages was very real, for sure, but stepping onto that factory floor brought a harsh, grueling new reality. Life in the factory was a violent shock to the human system. You weren't out in the fresh air anymore. You were locked inside massive brick buildings, surrounded by the deafening, bone-rattling noise of heavy machinery. In the textile mills, the air was often so thick with floating cotton lint that it literally coated the workers' lungs. In the ironworks, the heat was absolutely suffocating. So the economic opportunity was definitely there, and people were getting paid, but the day-to-day, minute-to-minute physical experience of earning that paycheck was incredibly intense, dangerous, and just completely unnatural to the human body. Just look at the sheer contrast of this shift. Before this era, humanity operated on sun time and seasonal time. Your boss was basically the weather. The tasks changed every single day depending on what the crops needed. Planting in the spring, harvesting in the fall, and when winter came, the pace of life naturally slowed down, allowing for some rest. But in the factory, the mechanical clock became the ultimate boss. The wages were steady, yes, but the tasks were relentlessly, mind-numbingly repetitive. You were doing the exact same physical motion for incredibly long shifts, sometimes 14 to 16 hours a day after day, regardless of whether it was a beautiful summer morning or a freezing winter night. It required a complete, exhausting rewiring of how human beings experienced time and physical labor. And as the very nature of human work shifted, the physical geography of daily life was forced to completely shift right along with it. we enter the era of the exploding cities. Millions of people were pouring into urban spaces that were absolutely fundamentally not built to hold them. Take a city like Manchester, England, for example. In just a matter of decades, it transformed from a relatively modest, quiet town into a booming, industrialized metropolis of hundreds of thousands of people. Imagine a town designed with enough roads, wells, and homes for 10,000 people, suddenly having to absorb 10 times that number in just a few short years. The physical infrastructure, the literal bones of the city, simply didn't exist to support that many human beings.
This created a devastating, almost unstoppable domino effect. It started with step 1, the irresistible magnet of new factory jobs opening up, promising a new way of life. This immediately triggered step 2, mass migration, as people flooded into the cities to chase those steady wages. But because so many people arrived almost overnight, we hit step 3. The cities faced severe, dangerous overcrowding. There just weren't enough buildings to put everyone in. And inevitably, with too many people crammed into too little space, without proper infrastructure, we arrive at step 4. Massive sanitation issues emerged. The primitive systems for clean drinking water and waste removal just collapsed entirely under the sheer weight of the booming population.
And this domino effect spelled out a grim, daily reality for these new factory workers. They finally had their steady wages, but what did they have to survive when they finally clocked out? Overcrowding meant entire extended families were crammed into tiny, dark, unventilated rooms in tenement buildings. Because of the severe housing shortage, these buildings were thrown up quickly and cheaply, making them incredibly unsafe. Outside, widespread pollution from the hundreds of coal-burning factories filled the air with thick, black smog that literally blocked out the sun. But the most terrifying threat came from the serious sanitation issues. Without proper plumbing, waste contaminated the drinking water, allowing deadly waterborne diseases like cholera to just spread like wildfire through the neighborhoods. The cities that promised so much opportunity had quickly become harsh, toxic environments.
But, human beings are incredibly resilient. And society didn't just sit back and accept this grim, dangerous new reality as the permanent status quo. They fought back. It became painfully clear to everyone that massive, unprecedented societal problems demanded completely new, large-scale solutions. You couldn't just fix these urban crises one house or even one street at a time. It required a total, radical rethinking of how a city operates and how a society is fundamentally obligated to protect the basic well-being of its people. In fact, this exact crisis inspired the very first modern public health efforts and the birth of modern public policy. City planners, medical professionals, and local leaders realized they had to step in with sweeping changes. In places like London, brilliant engineers like Joseph Bazalgette designed and built massive, unprecedented underground sewer networks to finally separate human waste from the drinking water. Governments started establishing the first building codes to ensure housing was actually safe and ventilated. They even introduced the very first labor laws to limit working hours and protect children from those dangerous factory floors. So the extreme, life-threatening challenges of industrialization literally forced society to innovate in governance. It proved once and for all that major economic shifts always require massive societal innovation to keep people safe.
Now, as we zoom out from the specific historical facts of the 19th century, I want to introduce you to a deeper philosophical framework from the HeroesMart Academy Godly Learner series. Because, let's be honest, learning about history isn't just about memorizing old dates and facts. It's about learning how to live successfully and ethically today. We've just seen how incredibly smart technological advancements like the invention of the steam engine and the factory system created immense societal wealth, but they also created immense human suffering when they weren't managed well. True progress, it turns out, all comes down to pairing smart minds with good choices. Which brings us to a core, undeniable truth. Education without morality will hurt. Think about it. What is the point of being incredibly smart, inventing amazing new machines, and being highly educated if you just continue to make bad choices that hurt the people around you? The factory owners of the 19th century weren't ignorant. They were highly educated engineers and brilliant businessmen, but many of them initially lacked the basic moral compass to provide safe housing, fair conditions, and human dignity for their workers. And because of that moral failure, the result was widespread suffering. True education must always go hand in hand with a strong moral foundation, because otherwise our greatest intellectual innovations can easily become our greatest societal nightmares. We can actually anchor this entire historical lesson in a timeless spiritual promise. Romans 8, 6, and 7 reminds us that a mind focused purely on the flesh, meaning just material gain, unchecked financial ambition, and putting profits over people, ultimately leads to ruin and chaos. But keeping your mind spiritual, guided by a higher moral purpose, that brings life and peace. True progress and actual peace of mind don't just magically come from sudden economic booms or massive technological leaps. They happen when our worldly knowledge and our incredible advancements are guided by deep spiritual wisdom and a genuine care for human life.
Which leaves us with this final, vital question to ponder. Today, we are living through our own massive, world-altering shifts. Think about it. Artificial intelligence, the digital revolution, genetic engineering. These are transformations every bit as big, if not bigger, than the terrifying leap from the quiet farm to the roaring factory. We absolutely have the technology. Our minds are smarter than ever before. But do we have the wisdom to use it? Will we remember the harsh lessons of the past, seek out careful good counsel, and ensure our incredible new innovations are guided by a firm morality that actually protects humanity? I want you to think deeply about that as you navigate your own rapidly changing world. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.